Hello and welcome to Label Sessions Presents. Label Sessions is a global platform that connects you to the best advice from the most interesting people, whether you want advice, mentoring, or ideas. I'm Ian Montgomery, one of the co-founders of Label Sessions. In this episode, Maxine Mackie of Label Sessions talks to Quintus Kropholler. Quintus is a former elite athlete turned innovator, driven by radical values. Founder of the agency of the same name, he's passionate about building businesses that change the world, combine his athletic mindset and eclectic working background with strategic vision. His journey empowers him to create future-worthy ventures with a lasting positive impact. Maxine talks to him to find out more.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Quintus. Could you, for me, a good place to start is, could you introduce yourself to the Label Sessions audience, please? Who are you?
Where to start? My background is in arts and design, industrial design, and I think I've designed more than I can think of really. In doing so, what I came to learn is really that what I was really doing was innovation, bringing together strategy and execution really together to achieve a very specific impact. And so my curiosity for business ultimately, combined with my ambition and my drive as a former athlete or a team athlete, has made me obsessed with solving for problems that really mattered beyond just making money or making something cool. Really, ultimately, with making or creating, facilitating new opportunities. And so in doing so in the past 15 years, I think I've learned I have quite a unique ability to design for systemic impact, bridging micro and macro in that sense. And so that goes from business strategy and business models to supply chain, customer experience, brand, and how all these components really come together and support ultimate value creation.
Wow, so many different things. How would you say that you're known for a particular thing? I'm not sure if there's a thing that you kind of talk about the most in the outside world right now, but you've done so many different things. What are you known for?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I have no idea what I'm known for. The fun thing of having done so many things at the same time or in so much time as well is that you become known for a great variety of things, but I think ultimately, or at least whatever you do within that specific scope or pocket, I think ultimately what I'm always focused on is creating environmental, social, and economic value in one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I call radical value or worthy innovation. And I think this is really about embracing the complex nature of the challenge that we face that requires new ways of business strategy and execution. And so I think that's what I would point at to be known for that.
And radical value isn't just, I guess it's more than, I guess for you, radical value is also the name of your agency that you founded. Can you tell us a bit about it? What's its mission and what kind of work do you focus on?
I've worked directly with global executives as much as the people who actually get their hands dirty in executing whatever companies value. And what I can tell is that what got us here is certainly not going to get us there. It's particularly also looking at corporate innovation and corporate consultancy. It's the way it's continuing to be done. I started to feel after quite some years is just wasting time killing a dead horse. And so...
Wait, what makes you say that? I'm quite curious.
A lot of corporations, and particularly leadership, they talk about change, yet regardless of their intention, because, who knows, but regardless of their intention, they're not organized for it. They're not set up to actually make change in a way that is required. And that, large corporations, they fear anything radical. Everything needs to be subtle. Yet what we as a global society need, what our planet needs, but also what we as humans individually need on many levels is a very, very radical change, and quickly. And so with Radical Value Agency, I figured to focus on specifically building new businesses, and building new businesses radically different. And so moving away from the ways and the typical institutions, from Harvard to the examples of great industrial organizations, to even Google, on how to go about business. Yeah, from thinking about customers and data towards vision, in order to really make change. With Radical Value Agency, we focus on diligence, we focus on accountability. At least I think that's the business that I ultimately am in, truly, which is also why it's called Radical Value Agency, because then we become totally measurable by any virtue on what we deliver. Because if it's not radical and not valuable, then we didn't succeed. And so in that way, we create a system of incentive around us, the way we envision how any new business or any business worthy of the future or worthy business should be incentivized and organized through real accountability.
I know you've done lots of work from like banking to Dutch railways, clean tech, housing, designed so many different things and work with architecture practices. Is there a thread that you can pull on there's correlation between all the different types of work that you do? Because I'm quite curious about what's the radical shift that you see that a lot of companies need to make. Like, how do you help them to do that? Is it really about vision? And then, because you've been talking about accountability, like how do you do that? And what's the common thread between all the different industries and sectors you've worked in?
Vision is an incredibly powerful and crucial element to creating anything that is worth, from economic worth to personal emotional worth, as much as environmental worth. And so in order to establish that kind of worth, we need to create real value. And so not products or solutions, but something that is meaningful and durable. And that's the kind of thing that I've always been focusing on in any of those segments or industries, really. And what that takes is to take, really like an ecosystemic approach, where banking, fintech, and my work, for example, for the Dutch National Railroad, is something that will always be integrated. And so what I mentioned earlier, looking at the big picture, the macro, and zooming into what that means, whatever that macro strategy or macro vision means and should look like on a micro level, and back again, and how that the micro opportunities and values we can create at that level can influence the macro again. That is the kind of thing that I've been mostly doing across all these sectors, across all these industries. There's this constant shifting back and forth between the levels and the domains of value creation.
You mentioned the ecosystem approach. How's that different from, say, a business and talking about being customer centric? What does it mean to have an ecosystemic approach?
I think it's most important to understand how customer centricity, I believe, has been vastly misunderstood. The way I've seen customer centricity being practiced across businesses over the past 15 years of my working life has been singular, as in it's been taken very literal, as in let's put the customer at the center and that is all that matters. And so that is something that kind of you're quite easily inclined to then just start listening to whatever a customer says they think and
then
what
building
they think
for that.
They want.
So really being quite reactive, saying that's what they want, we're going to build that, that's what we're going to be about. But what happens when a customer changes their mind?
Exactly. And so the thing is that a customer only knows what they know. And this is a major psychological concept. A lot of these organizations tend to forget, because the biggest value that you can create for a customer, first of all, is a continuous unknown. And that unknown, of course, is a very, very challenging very challenging front. And so what is even more challenging is all the many facets that play into in our at least originally from like a design point of view, where that customer centricity used to come from, is a lot more complex, because a customer is not a human being or a thing. Those are two different things. So yeah, a human can be a customer and a customer is a human. But also there's also a user involved, as much as how that user is dependent of the customer, that customer being dependent on it being a human or a dog, a completely different living entity in that sense, that are all subjected to, for example, an environmental condition. And so there is, in order to serve a customer, meaning creating economic worth through a transaction, which is what a customer is defined by, you're also needing to provide for that human and that environment they're dependent on, in order to really extend and create the value for that customer long term. And so this is the kind of thing, the kind of ecosystemic thinking about that is required in order to actually serve the purpose that people have defined as customer centricity. And so I prefer not to talk about customer centricity, because it is so sensitive to be misunderstood, which is why I prefer to talk more about ecosystemic value creation, because there is not really a center in an ecosystem, yet you need any and all ecosystem to support each other in order to continue and ultimately provide regenerative value creation for everything and all involved in there, including a customer.
So what are some qualities that future-worthy businesses should have? How do you ensure that in the conversations you're having and the businesses you work with are future-worthy? Think about a regenerative approach.
In business in general, we tend to focus a lot on intentions. Yet intentions, I think they only matter as much as the actual impact that you make. And this is a simple matter of correlation. I think future-worthy businesses should be focused on specifically correlations. And what do we say? What's our ambition? How are we going to actually make that true? And do we make that true? So as a team of athletes, we naturally had the intention to become European champion, world champion. And what's so exciting about that experience is that we only became successful in our shared mission when we operated with a real accountability, because that accountability is really the platform for achieving correlation. And I think that changing our economy and changing our markets for better requires no less. And so this is something that I'd say a future-worthy business needs to build on in order to create any more. And I think followed by that shortly is being intelligent and intentional and diligent with what you do, rather than pursuing speed. We really need to move away from the notion of go fast and break things. I think it's quite stupid, and I think it's always been stupid.
Go on, tell me more.
It makes no sense. It makes no sense in terms of like your invested time, your invested finance, your capital. If you go fast and break things, as cool as it sounds and as fun as it may be, you're missing out on a lot of actual relevant understanding and information in order to learn adequately and become really informed. I think that we've been far too much obsessed with data and basing decisions on data. Data is not necessarily going to transform us into the future. Data is about the past at best. And so this is where, we need vision to lead, values to support, and data to inform.
But not necessarily decide.
No, absolutely not.
What I get a sense when you're kind of when you're talking about these things is actually it's not about quantity, it's about quality of endeavor. And by doing that, I think just looping back to what you were saying before around inspiration and vision is one thing, it's a needed foundation, but actually it's the quiet diligence to translate that into an outcome into a thing. Rather than just talking about a thing, you need to do it. And you need to do that in this kind of a detailed look at how you are running a business today, as well as the business that you want to be in the future.
For some, it becomes too easy to just start doing without thinking about the implications and what it is that you really want to achieve. And so what it is that you're doing, what step in the total process is that going to be? And thus, what's the value of each step that should inform and help you decide on what the best thing is to do?
Let me ask you something. So I'm thinking about your background as a kind of as a product designer. When you're deciding what to do, I'm curious at your perspective around bringing in experts into a conversation, because I suspect that from your experience in the product design world, that as a designer, you would probably bring in experts in different materials to help you understand what's possible. Could you talk me through your experience as a product designer and how you would work in teams with experts? Because I suspect there's a correlation between what you're doing now.
The way for example, I've set up Radical Value Agency is exactly in the way as I've worked as a designer in the broadest sense, from product to architecture to businesses and services. And what is so incredibly important is to have constant diversity of perspective that enable for perspective changes to create new valuable insights. And so in doing so, particularly now with Radical Value Agency, is the way we work is based on incorporating environmental sciences, social and humanitarian scientists, together with UX and customer experience, CX designers and strategists, in order to make sure that you you're always informed based on expertise through with being able to access the right depth. That doesn't mean that you should go continuously into depth and going through one scientific research through another, but have access to a team of people and resources that provide you with adequate insight in order to make educated decisions, create new perspectives. That's the one way to really innovate with for worthy outcomes.
It was framed to me by an economist who was actually, his context was talking about data, but he was very much talking about having a bird's eye view and a worm's eye view, and moving between the two in order to make sense of things, because how you interrogate data will give you different answers each time. So you have to really go up and down. And I think it's the same with so many different kind of innovation practices.
Absolutely. It's interesting what you're saying, because data is inherently biased in and of itself, besides the way we look at data, which is, of course, comes with our own biases.
And are those biases from how we interrogate it? Is that because answers you get from data is based on the exact question you ask, which will have many blind spots, assuming?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the exciting thing is that when you design for value rather than a specific function or satisfying an immediate desire of a customer, when you design for value, you open up the spectrum of data that you generate from it that you could not have anticipated. So when you play into a more latent desire and exceed an expectation, an already existing expectation, you open up a completely new perspective for viewing data, and this is something that is so incredibly valuable in order to enable yourself to continue to innovate. Because this is what I see with a lot of companies, is that they've had an innovation, but then kept on just providing immediate solutions, reacting, like you said earlier, that just kind of like pushes them towards a ceiling instead of creating a whole new space above that ceiling with a truly new, valuable innovation. And so these perspectives on data is something that in science is called proxy. And so by creating a proxy, which can be in a form of a prototype or should be in a form of a prototype, you create something, you create an entity with which you can compare against existing data and see what is part of your presumption and what is something that falls outside of that and can be viewed in a different way. And this is also it's a very typical design approach in essence, but scientists really understand the value of that analytically, which is why it's so incredibly important to also integrate sciences in business strategy up until any product or service design that we produce from a business.
This podcast is brought to you by Label Sessions, the global platform that connects you to the best advice for the most interesting people. Around the world, we work with brands to connect their people to true leaders, just like the people you hear on this podcast. For live sessions of advice, mentorship, or sometimes to just collaborate on ideas. To find out more, visit labelsessions.com and book in for a demo with our team.
I'm curious the differences you see in the cultures and environments you've been working in, because I know that when you met some of our team, you were based in Canada, and now you're in, I think you split your time between the Netherlands and Portugal, maybe. How are you finding this kind of the different spaces you inhabit?
Yeah, it's wildly fascinating. I mean, it's been awesome to have been living and working in so many places, from Canada to the United States, Italy, France, Portugal, Netherlands, the UK, Germany. I worked in many more. And what's exciting is how being immersed in such seemingly similar societies, you really quite quickly become confronted with all the nuanced or sometimes much less subtle differences in the way we go about the exact same thing as anyone would do anywhere. And this is wildly fascinating, but also incredibly inspiring. It's again, it plays into that what I mentioned earlier, like this perspective shift, this constant change of perspective on one and the same thing enables you to like really start to see opportunities and start to understand what makes us all the same in many ways. What's been really interesting is particularly my work for an NGO, which is focusing on solving for global homelessness. And what they've been doing and what I've been helping them with, mostly with strategy on, is getting the right kind of people together that all have a perspective on homelessness around the world. So people from Asia, from North America, and from Europe, in their respective expertise and specialism, as well as their culture, their country, and thus their system of governance. And what's so fascinating in that experience is to see very tangibly materialize the differences that over the past 15 years I've been experiencing living in different countries. And that is that how, for example, in North America, Canada as much as the United States, very similarly look at homelessness, the problem, as a housing problem, as in a real estate problem, where and that way of looking at the problem informs or guides you towards the way you approach or look at solving for a problem. And so in that environment, the conversation is a lot about how do we make more. Whereas, for example, in the south of Europe, homelessness is something quite very much of a taboo, which is perceived through quite an amount of shame. And so homelessness is kind of like, seen as a problem in the shadows and that requires to be solved in the shadows. Whereas, for example, in the north of Europe, it's seen as a healthcare problem. And so it is also approached, at least the solution to it is approached from a very human and caring approach, which shows very interestingly in the results of homelessness, where, for example, here in the Netherlands, as much as from what I know in Denmark and Sweden, homelessness is actually very low. And people who are homeless are still functioning in the broadest sense of society in most cases. And so these kinds of, these nuanced differences in our culture across countries and regions that are seemingly so similar are really fascinating and particularly really relevant and important, I think, to understand in order to act on adequately and anticipate in order to work with effectively.
And I think that's a great example of the ecosystemic approach to looking at a thing across multiple geographies, how it's categorized, how it's solved for, and thinking about what you can learn and take from each of them to really think about how do you solve it in the now for people who are experiencing that right now. That sounds an exciting and really meaningful project.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's wonderful. It's I have a lived experience of homelessness myself, and luckily here in the Netherlands, which was with the experience of moving across many countries, I feel very fortunate with that because I know how hard it can be, yet at the same time it's been absolutely amazing to have been able to function in a system that is so caring as the one here in the Netherlands has been. That really, gave me a very valuable insight into what really matters as well, and what it takes in order, to make it out. And so it's awesome to work for an organization like this with so many people who have such lived experiences, as much as experts and specialists from legislation to legal and so forth. So it's wonderful. It's amazing.
Well, I hope you keep us kind of up to date on it and how the project and program progresses. We'd love to know what's on the horizon for you too, and what you're kind of most excited about for the rest of the year and beyond.
Yeah, gosh, what I'm truly excited about currently is working with a few companies that are really open and excited, inspired to really change the way of doing business and starting from scratch. What's so cool about it is that, we get to really redesign the way we think and act on creating value, on so many different fronts, from fair chain, agriculture to real estate development, and how tech plays into these things, not necessarily as a driver, but as a facilitator. And so that's something that I'm really, really, really excited about, and honestly very, very fortunate to be able to work in this and make a real significant difference. So that's mostly for the coming year that I'm truly excited about.
Let me shift the pace slightly and ask you a few questions. Really, I'm being nosy and I want to lift the lid on your kind of creative brain. So how do you stay updated on trends and innovations in the business world? So you're a designer, but where do you go to kind of stay up to date if you choose to do so?
Obviously, trends to me I'm not interested in trends. I mean, obviously you get word from trends from all over the place. What I'm much more interested in and what I'm much more deliberately looking at is what the implications or the impacts of certain trends are in daily life for what kind of people, what kind of demographics, and so forth. And so I'm trying to look through the trees rather than at the tree. Because a trend, I mean, the word of itself says it already. It's finite, it's temporary, and I'm looking for value, not for or opportunity that certain values can provide.
Where do you go to feed your creative brain?
I don't think creativity needs to be fed. I think creativity needs freedom in order to adequately manage its impact, manage its function.
And what do you think is overhyped right now? Is there anything interesting to you that's not being picked up by the mainstream, or anything that's just very overhyped?
Fools.
It could be fail fast. We've covered that.
Well, design thinking is certainly overhyped.
Why do you say that? Because I've got an opinion on this too.
Yeah, I think design thinking is a total bastardization of the true value and worth of a discipline of creating value. It's to dumb something down and simplify something so intricate and complex to a few steps, phases, and methods and processes is the exact opposite of the true value of its nature. And so design thinking becomes a success once you've finished your steps, which has nothing to do with creating value. That's just managing people's time and expectation rather than innovating, rather than creating. It's limiting people's ability and people's potence.
That's interesting.
What's your opinion?
Well, one of them is it's not very multifaceted. It's just one facet because it's a design approach, or my understanding at least, for software systems. As a result, it's process-led. So these are the steps someone takes. Where are the pain points and where are the opportunities to solve the pain points? And for me, my background has always been first-of-a-kind product innovation and experiences. I always struggled because there was no inspiration, there was no art of the possible. It was always about, I find design thinking to be, these are the process steps from today. These are the bits that are pain points. So solve them, and then you have a new experience. But I think it bypasses all the art of the possible and what you can do, and to be inspired by other things. And for me, I'm not a designer, but when I think about producing ventures, everything has to be multifaceted. And so for me, design thinking, it's nice that design is talked about. I personally don't think everybody is a designer, and I don't find language like that really helpful. And I just think it's really about the future possibility, not incremental change. So that's my view.
Absolutely. First of all, I despise the term design because it's very difficult to really assign meaning to something that is so vastly and widely used and abused in so many ways. And so I prefer to change the narrative of it much more rather and talk about what the result or the impact should be or ought to be, because then you can just talk a lot more substance. And this is something that I call radical value creation, because when you talk about something like radical value creation, then at any point in time creating new value, you can measure that by, hey, is this truly radical? Or is this on the way to become radical? And instead of going through steps, like you say, I think that approach of design is much more about dimensions or dimensional approach than first we're going to be creative and then we're going to execute. You ought to be creative in everything that you constantly do in creating something new, because otherwise you're just going to stop learning. And the whole point is that you want to learn through your process, learning by doing. And this is why I think, and pardon my French, but this is why I think design thinking books are the dumbest thing in the world. And you're literally reading a book about learning by doing, by reading about it. it makes no sense. It's a paradox. And so looking critically at these kinds of things enables you to think for yourself and see for yourself, learn for yourself. And that is what design is, not being told how to do something in a book.
We talked about radical value agency and what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve. What advice would you give to other startup founders? Because I think that you're trying to do things quite differently. So I suspect that you need really the people that you want to collaborate well with, and the clients that you probably work best with are very forward thinking. So that's my assumption. But talk to me about the advice that you would give to other startup founders.
I think the people that I work with, that we choose to work with, are, first of all, people that are ambitious, and that's it. And I think the advice that I have is don't go fast and break things. Diligence, focus on your specialty. What are you good at? And let the people who are good at the other things that you need, let those be done by those people. Excel at what you do. Don't try to do it all.
Tell me you procrastinate sometimes and you're not always diligent all of the time.
Oh God, yeah. Oh my, yeah. It's kind of embarrassing actually, but oh no, it's not that bad. I look at motorsports. It's as in like I follow motorsport news. Why? Because it's in motorsports you find a real high performance meeting strategy and technology, and it becomes so utterly clear and measurable what and where the value of what investment, what that results into.
You've made the procrastination thing a serious thing because that's how diligent you are. I was expecting,
I guess so.
I doodle. I like to color in. It could have been anything, but it was a diligent thing, which I think says a lot about you.
Yeah, I guess it does. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and it's no, it's like it. There's a component of it is just like I'm like I said earlier, I'm obsessed with changing things for better, and that's what sports is very much about. At least that kind of high performance sports, and particularly the inclusion of technology and strategy is just phenomenal. And it's at the same time, you have like the bright colors and the whatnot. So it's also very stimulating in a way that you need in order to effectively procrastinate. Yeah.
So what title would you give your biopic or autobiography?
Oh God. I think some cool Gen Z words. I don't know. I need to go through a list of Gen Z words to figure that one out. But something like that. Yeah.
No.
I don't know why they sound cool.
Okay. I'm going to have to ask this. On a scale of 1 to 10, how weird are you, Quintus?
I think I'm super normal. Super normal, and I just see things differently.
And would you give that a number?
I'd say 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last thing. I'm curious now. What was your field hockey position that you played in most?
I was a goalkeeper.
Were you?
It was quite a fascinating position to be in.
I know, you can see everything. You see the ecosystem in front of you.
Well, literally.
Yeah, and coming at you.
You have an incredibly defensive and important position in that sense. At the same time, you're at the foundation of any offense, and you have a constant. Yeah, you're constantly involved in setting up offensive strategy and defensive strategy, and switching in between based on 10 people in front of you with specific tactical ability. And so forth, and so it's been super cool to have that kind of experience. I still notice a lot of my experience as an athlete, how I leverage that sometimes unconsciously into how I work.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. This is wonderful.
So that concludes Label Sessions Presents. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast, no matter your platform. And of course, start your journey with us today at labelsessions.com.